Before we kick things off, I should say that this theory is not entirely my own. The primary thesis of this video was suggested by a friend of mine some time ago. So, my good man, skills recognized. And to the rest of you watching this, I have said this before, and I will never stop saying it. If you ever watch my content and would like to give your 2 cents on whatever the subject is, please do not hesitate to make yourself known. I like to think of myself as a generous content creator, and will happily give shoutouts whenever possible. So, with that being said, let us continue to theorize about the sinner who stands at the crossroads of chaotic evil and straight villainy, and ask the following question. What is Alastor's shadow? A question that, at the current moment, can't really be answered, because despite being one of the key players in the series, in addition to being one of the most popular characters, we know almost nothing about him. So, when it comes to examining him as a character, many questions arise, and the emergence of this shadow simply adds on to the already existing heap. For example, does it strike anyone as a bit odd that whenever he's in front of a camera, his form is jumbled and distorted apart from his shadow? Why does it appear that he has some kind of black mass inside of his body that resembles his shadow greatly? When he teleports, why does it look like the dark shape within is quickly coated by his physical body, not unlike how the Skrulls shapeshift in Marvel Comics? Why do we have scenes where he moves so fluently he could put angels pole dancing to shame? I never thought I'd say that. But in others he moves in a stilted, inhuman fashion, like something out of The Exorcist. Why is his shadow always telling us the truth in its expressions as opposed to his shit-eating grin? Why does no one else ever comment on this thing? It's not like it's hiding. And here's the big one. Why is he the only character that we see with this little quirk? It seems like something Zestial Mord would jump on without hesitation that isn't Carmilla Carmine. I would also like to connect this as best I can to my previous theory on him, where I believe that his staff is being used to channel power into his being, as I think the two can go hand in hand. And after quite a bit of pondering on the subject, I think I may have an answer. I think that the Alastor we have seen so far is not the real him, but this shadow is. And I don't mean this in a metaphorical sense, but shadow psychology may come into play. For those who may not be aware, psychologist Carl Jung described the shadow as our darker side, the part of us that isn't held down by morality or social regulations. The best examples of this can be seen in the DCAU with Harvey Dent contending with his dark persona, Big Bad Harv.
I'm going nowhere, Missy. If anyone's leaving, it's Mr. Goody Good. And maybe you with him. Did I do this?
Or, for a more direct comparison, Batman compared to the Batman Who Laughs, as the latter is the former, but with his humanity and sanity stripped away. Put a pin in that, as I do intend to use it again later. But let's really dive into things here by taking a look at Alastor's introductory appearance when Charlie answers the knock on her door. Now, notice how the eye on the staff and his own opened in unison? It's almost like someone, or something, hit a switch and turned him on. When comparing this scene to others, such as when his head and body do a 180, how at times he simply stands frozen like he's a DVD player on standby mode, it leads me to believe that the Alastor we see is nothing more than a vessel that is being operated by his shadow like a puppet. Now, granted, this idea does have holes in it, but that is why they call it a theory. And when it comes to his lines about pulling all the strings, with his shadow rising eagerly behind him like the shark from Jaws, it makes me speculate a lot more than I should. I should mention as well that when going over some of the smaller details, the question of whether or not Alastor could have signed a contract with the Ars Goetia was raised, based on the lyric of him clipping his wings. Which is a pretty cool idea, but I don't think it's the case, as they qualify as hellish royalty, and outside of Charlie, no one else seems to care what the sinners do. Well, maybe except for this guy here.
Got a ton of barbed wire to shove in his...
So I doubt the Goetia would make an exception for Alastor, because how exactly would they benefit from such a thing? Lilith may still be a contender as she appears to be in heaven, and that lyric about wings could be a connection, even though she's technically not an angel, but we do see her hovering above hell in the prologue, so she could possess some kind of flight-based power. I mean, hell, Adam could fly, so why not her?
Hey, I thought you wanted equality!
I also made mention in my previous video on the radio demon that he was absent for the episode involving heaven, but when it came to the fallout from that visit, he was right smack dab in the middle, ready to play his little games again. But the idea of him being a puppet and the shadow being his true self may yet bear fruit, especially when you think about the questions I posed at the beginning and compare them to scenes that give this theory credence. Let us take his little spiel about smiles and masking.
Just because you see a smile, don't think you know what's going on underneath. It inspires your friends, keeps your enemies guessing, and ensures that no matter what comes your way, you're the one in control.
And now let us compare two other scenes, one from Stayed Gone and the other from when he makes his deal. If we look at his smile in Stayed Gone, we can see that he has stitching in the top corners, presumably to keep that grin in place. It also raises the question of whether or not he did it himself, or if his master did it. You could say that because we see him with the same grin during Mimsie's story, that he did it himself, but I wouldn't put too much stock in Mimsie given what we've seen from her thus far. And in scene number 2, where he makes his deal with our dear princess, we see his form change to reveal even more stitches around the mouth, in addition to other areas of his body. If you look closely, you can see the same thing during Stayed Gone as well. All the stitching makes it appear as though his body isn't necessarily as solid as his shadow appears to be, which could explain why he can slink in and out by becoming ghostly, but still needing something somewhat solid to interact with the world around him, while still being flexible enough to vanish when need be. Call it the balance in the Force. There's also the chance that some of those marks could be from a battle.
You still pissed he almost beat you that time?
Fuck you!
Just saying.
But since the sinners can't truly be killed without using angelic weapons, press X to doubt. Although, the extra stitching on his mouth may be for another purpose beyond making sure that smile stays put. That being said, let us look back at his conversation with Zestial, where he mentions rumors of Alastor falling to Holy Arms. To which Radio Antlers avoids the question, makes suspicious movements, and even throws in his laugh track. He even schmoozes Mr. Mord a little towards the end of their conversation, like he's trying to get off topic. It's clearly a question he does not want to answer, and he even repeats this later on when Husk confronts him, but since he's got the bartender under contract, he's not too concerned about him blabbing. And since he always shuts down that type of conversation from going any further, maybe he makes sure things can't go any further, because it's something he could be afraid or forbidden to answer. And if he was to do so, the consequences could be dire. Especially if he's just a shadow of his former self, piloting an empty vessel. Although, I do make an exception for when Carmilla asks, since that interaction seems more like him trying to feed his own ego, or he knew that she wouldn't really care, and knew that it would shut down any further debate on the subject. As a side note, I like how he puts the staff up, like he's trying to make sure that the eye gets a full field of vision of what's happening, so if it is connected to his master, this could be an attempt to show that he's not up to something, and he's just being a good little Wendigo. Also, I should ask if anyone else has noticed that the shadow never shows up whenever he's around other overlords or Lucifer. Even when he's on Carmilla's camera, he barely flickers as opposed to other moments in the show. It's almost like he's trying to hide something from prying eyes. Eyes from those at power levels like his or exceeding his own. And speaking of cameras, I've always found that line about his face being made for radio to be a bit off, considering how vain of a character Alastor is, and how swiftly that camera short-circuited. It seems a little convenient for my taste. We've also got this puppet figure in Lucifer's workshop that looks oddly like how Alastor is dressed, and even then the radio demon's head and neckline appear that way as well. Again, a little too convenient. Also notice how the shadow is always showing what he's really feeling beyond what we can see on his face. The best example of this is when he's defeated, where we see the shadow visibly frowning and grabbing hold of him as he vanishes, and later during finale where both body and shadow appear equally unhinged and ambitious. And since shadow psychology involves dealing with our darker side, which isn't held down by the same inhibitions or regulations as other parts of our psyche, Alastor's literal shadow fits this mold a little too well, especially since its antlers are always elongated, which we only see occur physically when absolutely necessary. Notice how gleeful it is with blazing red eyes as he explains his version of entertainment to Vaggie. Plus, if you've seen the show, then you know that Alastor isn't exactly playing by any rules other than his own, but also throughout the show, he's not been as malevolent as the stories make him out to be. I'd wager that when we see his shadow lingering about, when he's indulging in a little fun, or even mentioning it, that could be him showing us his cards a little bit. He wants to be as twisted and wicked as possible, like when he first arrived in Hell, but for one reason or another, he can't be. This is most likely because of whatever contract he made that may have stripped him of a substantial amount of power, to such an extent that he's nowhere near where he once was, and why he was simply loitering around the hotel, waiting for the right moment to strike something up with our dear princess. But it's not like he wasn't already trying to do that anyways. And if this theory holds water, I imagine him making that deal with Princess Morningstar would allow Alastor to maneuver himself into such a position where he could both restore himself and shed his bindings. It actually reminds me quite a bit of Dante's Inferno, where we see Lucifer trying to break free from his chains and using his shadow to direct events so things work out in his favor.
What you perceive of me is a literal shadow of my former self.
It also may explain why he's the only individual in both Hazbin Hotel and Hell of a Boss to have something that appears to be a piece of himself, but also a separate being simultaneously. But those are just my thoughts on the matter. Tell me what you think in the comments below, whether you agree, disagree, or if you think this can be expanded, feel free to make yourself known. And if you like what you heard, be sure to smash that like button, subscribe for more content, and ring that bell to be notified when something new drops. With that being said, Godspeed, and I hope to see each of you in the next installment.